Right. I hope I've got a strange noise on my line. I hope people can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So, well, in that case, good evening and welcome to this virtual meeting of the Planning Committee. And we'll take the agenda as published at the moment. So, if we could please have any apologies. I've just been given Councillor Jones's apologies, and we have apologies for Councillor Williams, who is substituted by Councillor Burgess this evening. We got any further apologies at this juncture?
Nope.
No.
Okay. In that case, we'll move on to declarations of interest. And I'd ask members now if they have any declarations of interest to make on the agenda items in front of us.
None.
None. No.
And again, I think the silence or members saying no means that we can move on from there. Let's move to item 3, which are minutes of the previous meetings as circulated. Are members of the committee content that they're a correct record of our past proceedings?
Move them, Chair.
Can I just, I'll take this by acclamation unless there are comments to be made. Councillor Reddish, did you wish to make a comment?
No, I was just going to say I would second it if you wanted me to.
Okay. Welcome to Councillor Maxfield, who I think has managed to join us after various electronic problems.
I have, yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, the powers of technology is all well and good until the powers of technology go into a power cut.
Okay, well, we're very glad to see you, Councillor.
Thank you.
And you've arrived just in time, I think, for our first substantive item this evening, which is item 4, application for major development land of ECCLESHALL Road in Loggerheads, for which we have 2 speakers. And our protocol order would be that the ward councillor, Councillor Panther, will speak first, followed by Mrs. Freeman, who is the speaker in favour of the application. I'm hoping that they're in the waiting room.
Councillor Panther isn't chair, but Alison Freeman is.
What we'll do is we'll move, if members are happy with this, we'll move to item 5 on the agenda, which I'm not sure will take a long period of time, but nonetheless, that would give perhaps Councillor Panther a chance to connect if he's experiencing problems with his net connection. So if members are agreeable, let's progress to item 5, the application for minor development, St John the Evangelist RC School in KIDSGROVE. I'll just ask our officer if we've got any extra items there, apart from the supplementary, of course, which you've been warned about on the agenda.
No, it's the supplementals, the only item there.
Okay. So you see the recommendation in front of you, and I invite comment from members. Councillor Burgess.
Yeah, well, this is in my ward, and I've had no people complain about it, but there are people that drive up and down Gloucester Road. They're saying, is there going to be any decent car parking spaces for people going to that school? I'm trying to find out the plan on my iPhone, but I can't bring it up for some reason. So
I don't know if the officer could screen share perhaps a plan, and if the council wishes to speak to the plan.
yes, I'd like to see where the car parking is, because it's a bit awkward when you're coming from Liverpool Road up Gloucester Road, because I live on Gloucester Road a bit higher up, and people are parked on the grass verge, and it's difficult for traffic coming down Gloucester Road and going up Gloucester Road because of parked cars, and people are saying, well, can't they make a car park, a decent one, for people to park, that go to that school? And if they're going to make it bigger, then we have more cars, and that will be a problem. That's the only thing that people have said to me. That residents aren't concerned. It's just people going up and down Gloucester Road that drive a lot. So there you are.
If it assists, so I can do a short little presentation on the scheme for members.
Yes, I think that would be useful, Mr. Fleet, and indeed, if we have a plan of the site, maybe to speak to that to address the issue the councillors raised.
Okay. I'll just loading up the image and I'll screen share it with you now. Okay. Oh, apologies, I need access rights. It's disabled by the host, so I don't know if somebody can.
Wonderful.
I think if Jeff, can we contact the techno wizards?
Right again, Sean.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm in now. Okay. Okay, so I think in a few seconds you should be getting access to view.
Yeah, I can see the plan now.
Yes, I can see it now.
Now it's slightly cluttered drawing on there.
Yes.
Yes, I'll zoom in a few stages to actually allow you to see the scheme a bit closer. But as you can see, all these rectangles scattered up and down the road are part and parcel of the wider highway improvements that are part of the application. But at the heart of it is the school itself. So what we have here is the school complex, and the main school building is this structure which is being circled by the mouse. And then there's the expansion of the school. There is the existing access that comes in here, and that leads into the back around the school, but also a new parking area at the front. So this provides just a few sort of about, I think it's 5 normal parking spaces, but also some disabled parking as well. But a key feature is that we have the existing zebra crossing, which is down at the other end of the road, which is to be upgraded. But a brand new zebra crossing as well is to be provided. Now, the precise location of this is to be confirmed, but it links in with the public footpath that comes through from the estate at the back. So it allows children to come through, cut through the alley, hit the pedestrian crossing and safely get across the road. And there's a new gate then that leads for children to come round the back of the parking area, so avoiding any overlapping with staff cars or anything in this parking area, and then they'll come into the school complex. But along
so is there only, excuse me for asking, but so there's only 5 parking spaces then?
There's more at the rear as well. So
there's more at the rear as well, because I don't know whether you know the site, but as it stands now, you come off Gloucester Road and the site goes down bank, and you've got to the left of that, there's a field there, playing field, that belongs to the school. And people are saying, well, why can't they put more car parks on that? Make it easy access for people coming up and down Gloucester Road, 4 cars, you know, for people that are taking children to school.
That was
because if this is a road and pavement here, as it said, you know, it's been churned up quite a bit with cars being parked on there. And in fact, there were notices put up by the school discouraging people from parking near the entrance. So, you know, that is a concern.
Yes, and this is...
Am I right in thinking it's 15 car parking spaces in total, plus disabled?
Yes, so you've got the 5 there, and then there's more at the back in that location.
Yeah, I think I've just counted them as 15.
Yeah.
There was an earlier generation of this drawing which had another parking area in this location. So it did, as you say, Councillor, cut into the playing field. But it got very close to one of the sporting pitches, and Sport England came back because for many years the provision of sports facilities for children has been a key government priority as well. And that impact on the sports provision, with the risk of children kicking, for example, onto teachers' cars. I'm not talking from personal experience, hopefully, but that impact there was of a concern to Sport England. So that, following discussions with the county highways officers about the necessity for that parking area, it's been considered that actually a series of improvements on the main road itself, with these now formalised bays along the edge of the road, because this is the grass verge that runs along. they're actually looking to tarmac that and make it a sort of pull-in space. The road's reasonably wide and you've got some quite rich pavements in there as well. So there is the capacity to pull vehicles out of the way of the free flow of traffic. But also with some of the modal shift stars measures and other cycle parking, and trying to sort of regulate where the cars park, because as you know, probably appreciate, it's a bit of a free-for-all at the moment with cars.
Definitely.
Yeah. So they've got, for example, if I move in a bit closer, it's trying to tighten up here where the parking area and railings that come very close to the pedestrian crossing to try and keep cars away from the crossings in these areas. So it's very much around that. County Highways did originally object to the application, as you might be aware, and they've had to work over the sort of months and the summer months with the DFE and the applicants to try and find a way of making this acceptable. It's felt that with a whole range of sort of measures that are brought in for sort of managing parking, trying to promote other measures, that this is a sustainable and safe way of trying to deliver the expansion of the school and bring all of the children together onto one campus. Ideally, we'd have started trying to look at having the facility down the road, back in town on the other campus, but it didn't offer that capacity to deliver it. So it's been looked at on this site. There is a bit of impact on the green belt, but we believe that having looked at the alternatives, those very special circumstances exist to justify a bit of green belt development in the pursuance of improved education facilities for the children. And on balance, we think that this is a safe and appropriate development subject to those conditions. We'll also have a condition on the construction phase with a construction management plan in there as well, to make sure that all those builders, transit vans and everything else don't cause the trouble. Now, the build of this will be about a year, so there will be an overlap between the children on site and construction, but the aim is to have this project completed by September 2021, so that that new cohort of children will be able to come straight to the school at the beginning of the academic year without the disruption of being down in town and then having to relocate halfway through the year. So we feel we've got to a position where a recommendation of approval is an appropriate one now. Thank you, Chair.
Well, as I say, I've had no complaints from residents. It's just concerns people have that drive up and down Gloucester Road. And it doesn't affect me because I go very early in the morning, and by the time I get back in the afternoon, the children at school anyway, and there's no cars parked. So there are people that are very concerned about it, you know, just as long as there's sufficient parking spaces, I've no objection to it whatsoever. I think it's a good thing.
So if we just look at the recommendations in front of us, I know recommendation A says subject to the receipt of no objections from the highways authorities by the date of the committee meeting. I know of no new objections. I'm correct in thinking that none have been received. Is that correct?
Yes, the supplemental confirms they've moved to a position of no objection
Right.
to the application now.
So in that case, are any other comments from members? Councillor Reddish.
Hello. I did put my light on. I was hoping to ask this question when the site plan was on. What proportion then of the green belt is being used? I just wanted to try and determine in my own mind how much of the green belt we're actually losing. But I realise you've gone off the site plan now. Is it a lot or is it a little?
It's a detail that the main case officer was dealing with. I couldn't precisely tell you the exact line of it, apologies, but the development does bite into a part of the green belt, which I think is towards the rear of the site.
Yeah, okay.
Chair, can I? Sorry,
Certainly,
I'm not sure.
Councillor. Please do.
Yeah, having looked at this and the improvement that's brought to this school by moving these two small broken parts together to achieve one school for over 200 pupils in this area, I think is a terrific improvement for KIDSGROVE, and I think it's welcomed by certainly the vast majority of people. I certainly would be proposing that we accept officer recommendation on this, and I would certainly be proposing that.
Do we have any more comments?
Myself, please, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
It's fine. Could I just mention to whoever's in the background, normally I can see little hands appear at this juncture. I'm not sure that my access to that's engaged, because I'm not seeing anything like that at all at the moment. But let's go with Councillor Maxwell then. Councillor Moffat wish to speak as well?
Yes, please.
If we go in that order, I do apologise, but I can't see anything at the moment. So please wave or do whatever you feel is appropriate.
Okay.
Don't worry, Chair. I did have my hand up as soon as it came up, but it's okay. I fully endorse this as someone who was a parent once at this school. Both of my kids actually attended. The eldest now being 27, so it shows how long ago it is. And the mither that there was, especially when you've got kids on both sides, there was more traffic that was actually generated for parents to be able to make the mad dash up the road from the Avenue site to Gloucester Road. And that was far more hazardous than what it is that has been proposed or that Councillor Burgess is concerned about. It's the Avenue site is not fit for purpose and hasn't been fit for purpose for a long time. And this school has been waiting for this for, well, the best part of about 30 years that I can think back to. So I 100% endorse this. The fact that the highways have actually now come round and are happy with it is another pleasing thumbs up for this to actually go ahead, where all the children are on one site, and it can then, they get a full education. Parents then, a lot of the parents actually live locally. It means that they haven't got to actually use the vehicle to do the 5-minute dash that goes from the Avenue to Gloucester Road, which is what used to happen because there wasn't a great deal in difference in the times of day that they were finishing. And so a lot of them will be walking, which takes all the hassle of, could you pick mine up and I'll pick yours up, and somewhere around Tesco we'll do an exchange. So yeah, I'm really happy with this, and I'm really happy that highways have changed their mind. So that's all I will say on that. Thank you. Thank you,
Councillor. Councillor Moffat.
Yeah, I actually just want to echo what Councillor Proctor and Councillor Maxfield have just been saying. Reading the comments when the plans were put forward from the parents, the teachers, the general population of KIDSGROVE, there's such excitement about the prospect of these plans. I think it was MP Joan Wally who some 5 years or more ago originally got some funding for the school. It's great to think that those children will be getting the facilities to really support a fabulous education. And I think with regards to worries over traffic, I think this plan really fits very well with kind of the future plans for KIDSGROVE. I know that the County Council are very keen on kind of transport plans for things like trains, travelling to school and travelling to work. So it's a great step forward, and I've got absolutely no concerns at all about supporting this application.
Thanks very much, Councillor. Councillor Burgess.
Yes, just to make it quite clear, no one in the area is against the application. In fact, they're all for it, including myself. It's just that people did mention about the traffic situation because at school times it's been rather hectic with cars parked on the pavement and on the grass verges. But if things are going to alter, that's brilliant because it's good for KIDSGROVE. Great. And I'm sure Mrs. Walklet, the headmistress, will be very pleased about it.
Thanks very much, Councillor. Before we proceed to a vote, can we ask just if there are any further comments from members?
No.
Well, I think we've had this proposed and seconded. I think Councillor Proctor proposed it formally. I think Councillor Maxfield, when she said I fully endorse this, can be taken as seconding this proposal.
Absolutely.
So I propose to go round councillors one by one and ask them whether they're for or against the recommendation. I'll do it in the form I can see them on the screen. So first of all, Councillor Burgess,
4.
Councillor Reddish,
4.
Councillor Moffat,
4.
Councillor Maxfield,
4.
Councillor Northcott,
4.
and somewhere in the ether, Councillor Proctor.
4.
In that case, that recommendation is carried unanimously. I think we can now return, I hope, to the application for major development on item 4. We're 23 minutes into our meeting, so I think really now those who were going to speak had a bounden duty to have logged in by now, unless we've been alerted to the fact that they can't log in at all. So I propose to return to item 4. Before I go on, draw councillors' attention to the fact, again, there's a supplementary report and a further document attached to this item for consideration. And I'd just like to ask our officer if there have been any further developments that councillors need to be made aware of.
No, there's nothing further to add, but could I just take this opportunity to ask that Jen Huff be brought into the meeting? She's in the waiting room and she may have some comments to make in response to debate. So if you could be in the meeting, that would be useful. Thank you.
Please. And equally then, my understanding is that we have 2 speakers on this item, Councillor Panther as the ward councillor and Mrs. Freeman as someone speaking in favour of the application. Our speaker protocol, for those who are not aware of this, is as follows. Speakers have 5 minutes to address the committee. After 4 minutes have elapsed, a verbal warning will be given to them to make sure that they don't miss any of the points that they think are absolutely crucial. Those 5 minutes are the sum total of their contribution to the meeting this evening. The convention is that ward councillors speak first, objectors to the application speak second, and those in favour of the application speak third. So on those terms, if we can have our first speaker this evening, which is Councillor Panther, please, brought into the meeting to address us.
Chair, it's Councillor Hutton. Councillor Panther's still not arrived.
Okay. In that case, if Councillor Hutton wishes to speak on this, is item 4, remember, the ECCLESHALL Road application. I'm happy for the councillor to address us.
Sorry, Chair, I'm here to speak on item 7, not on item,
right,
not on the ECCLESHALL Road. I know nothing about it. So,
thank you very much, Councillor. No, it's very, very right for you to draw that to our attention. So I'm correct in saying that Councillor Panther is not with us.
That's correct, Chair.
Well, I'm afraid I think now we're up to half an hour into the meeting. We have to proceed. So I'm going to invite Mrs. Freeman to speak and address us in favour of the application. Again, I don't know if she can be brought into the meeting from the waiting room.
I'm here.
Thank you, Mrs. Freeman. I can't see you. See, this is the point. So I take it you heard what I said about the speaking protocol.
I did, sir. Thank you.
Right. So you have 5 minutes to address the committee on those terms, starting whenever you feel comfortable.
Thank you, members. I don't think I'll be 5 minutes. Okay, but anyway, so thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm here as Nick couldn't be. So you'll be aware this application follows the approval of the outline consent for the construction of up to 55 houses granted in April 2018. The outline consent included approval of the access arrangements onto the highway. The site is located within the open countryside as identified in the local plan and within the Loggerheads village envelope as identified in the neighbourhood plan. Members will also be aware that the principle of the development has already been established through the outline consent. This includes both the general layout principles and the buffer. I come on to this later. This application seeks the approval of the detailed reserve matters for a development involving 44 dwellings, including 33 2- and 3-bedroom detached open market bungalows. It also proposes a mix of 11 1- and 2-bedroom semi-detached and terraced bungalows which would form the on-site affordable housing provision. The proposed layout includes an area of public open space in accordance with the Council's open space strategy that will connect with the surrounding network of public footpaths within the adjacent woodland. In accordance with the outline consent, a 5-metre buffer is proposed between the development and the woodland. Whilst the Woodland Trust seek a buffer of at least 30 metres from the edge of burnt wood, referred to by them as a standard, which it isn't, this is at odds with the findings of the Phase 1 Habitat Survey's recommended buffer of 5 metres of planted trees and shrubs, plus additional measures. This buffer was fully considered at the outline stage and is included within both the design and access statement and the Phase 1 Habitat Survey, which themselves are conditioned and required under conditions 15 and 16 of the outline consent. So the buffer is fixed. Your officer will explain that a reserved matters application isn't the platform for revisiting this. But most relevant, I think, to members is that the overarching body, Natural England, supports the measures for the protection of burnt wood and the submitted layout. The mix of properties proposed would all be single story in height and would respect the character of the local area. The site is well contained by the adjacent woodland, and as such, the proposed development would not result in any harm to the wider landscape. Indeed, it would be less visually prominent than the 55 two-story dwellings envisaged in the outline consent. There must be few developers who are proposing bungalows which are so well suited as lifetime homes, easily adaptable for the less able. I'm also advised, and it might have been raised today, that it's been suggested bungalows would be too expensive for first-time buyers and downsizers. Whilst pricing isn't a planning matter, the scheme provides a full range of bungalows, including affordable homes. There is an identified very large unmet demand for such adaptable properties, particularly for downsizers who can then release larger family homes onto the market. The layout has been designed in accordance with the principles set out in the design and access statement, which accompanied and is conditioned to the outline consent, and also consideration given to the relationship with neighbouring properties and the woodland.
1 minute.
An area of open space is to be provided in accordance with the Council's open space strategy. The scheme makes efficient use of a site within a highly sustainable location, which offers the opportunity to provide a mix of 1, 2 and 3 bedroom dwellings, both open market and affordable, which would add to the choice and supply of dwellings in loggerheads, providing properties for families and for the elderly. Finally, therefore, the proposed development would comply with the framework and policies of your local plan. We respectfully ask members to support the proposed development and approve the application. Thank you, members.
Thank you very much, Ms Freeman. Could I just ask our clerk if Councillor Panther has appeared in our waiting room or he's still absent?
No, still absent, Chair.
Thank you very much. In that case, I'll pass on and ask our officers if they wish to comment on anything they've heard so far.
No, there's nothing really I can add. There's yes, everything that's been stated is set out within the report, and I can answer any questions that may be raised if members have any specific questions that they want to ask.
Thank you very much, Mrs Moulton. I think if I may, I'm going to ask a question which I hope will make things clear at the beginning of this debate. Reference was made to a buffer at this point, and I know that this has generated some concern. My question is, given that this buffer was determined at the outline stage, would, in your judgment as a planning officer, do you believe it appropriate to revisit that issue now, or is that introducing material which would be challengeable were extra changes to be made at this juncture?
Yes, certainly it is clear in the outline planning permission that was granted that the requirements were that the development is laid out in accordance with the phase 1 habitat survey, which included a recommendation that there was a 5-metre buffer, and the decision was made on the basis that that 5-metre buffer was acceptable and is specifically required by the outline. To now require a larger buffer would be contrary to the terms of the outline planning permission, and the local planning authority would be going beyond their remit to require such additional measures over and above what was specified in the outline consent.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Moulton. I think it is important for members to be clear in their own minds how this issue stands, because it is, I think, maybe the most important of the issues are there. I look for contributions from members, and since we haven't had our ward councillor, I wonder if Councillor Northcott, who's I think the nearest of us, wishes to comment upon this issue before anyone else.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate your introduction into this. I also appreciate the clarification in terms of the buffer zone. If this is something that the committee are mindful to do at this stage, I believe that the recommendation for the buffer zone was a recommendation. It wasn't set out as a specific prescriptive measure. In light of different evidence or reports coming forward, could this be something that the committee could change now in light of the concerns and the identification of special circumstances, particularly to the area of the tree and the triple SSIs that are in the air? So I'd just like to clarify that, really, because I think there's an expectation from the community that this is something within our powers to do if we're privy to new information since the outline planning permission was granted.
Again, if I could refer to our officer on this question.
I am not sure what new information that we have now to reach a different conclusion. The guidance, the national guidance was in place. We sought the response of Natural England, who are a statutory consultee, given that the Burntwood, the ancient woodland, is in part a triple SI, a site of special scientific interest. So the basis upon which the consideration of this development is the same now as it was when the outline planning permission was granted, and the outline planning permission specified that a buffer of at least 5 metres is provided, and that's what has been provided within this layout. The committee need to assess this against the outline permission that was granted, and it certainly accords with the requirements set out in condition of that permission. It may be that members would have preferred a scheme with a larger landscape buffer or larger buffer to the ancient woodland, but certainly it cannot be said that this is contrary to the terms of the outline planning permission that's been granted, and on that basis it would not be reasonable to refuse the application.
Now, could I, again, if I may, just I sense that this is the main matter at issue for members. If we just explore that one little bit further, I think I know what your answer will be, Mrs. Moulton, but I think I ought to put the question. I note that the preamble to this says this application is for the approval of reserved matters relating to, and then amongst the things listed, in fact, the final one listed is landscaping. Am I correct in thinking that landscaping here does not include the issue of the buffer, or could it be included in that particular item?
I suppose, yes, the buffer is to be landscaped, but the parameters within which the landscaping around the periphery of the site, acting as a buffer to the ancient woodland, is set out in another condition that requires that it's carried out in accordance with the recommendation of the phase 1 habitat survey, which specifies a 5-metre buffer to mitigate the impact of the development on the ancient woodland. So landscaping is a matter for consideration now, but the outline permissions set the parameters within which the reserve matters needs to adhere to, and it does. This submission is in accordance with what's specified.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So, having heard what your officer has said, I invite further comment from members. Councillor Reddish.
It's a similar line of questions, but not about buffer. It's about the provision of play facilities. I mean, I realise that we're on reserved matters now, not outline, and perhaps maybe we should have said something on outline permission. But is it too late to take the views of the landscape department? I mean, can we add play facilities, or is it really, really too late? And if we did, how would that stand with the applicant in terms of appeal?
Again, the outline application was considered in the context of policies that applied at that time, and the policies on open space was different in terms of the requirements to provide play facilities for a development of this scale. At that time, when the principle of development was accepted, there was no requirements to provide play facilities within the site. I would say that is a matter of principle, the requirement or otherwise, to provide play facilities. We're not at the stage where we're considering principle. We're at the stage where we're considering the reserve matters. It doesn't fall comfortably within the consideration of reserve matters. So in conclusion, it is too late to now require the provision of play facilities within this development. We can only require some open space provision.
Okay.
Which this scheme does.
Councillor Proctor. Sorry, Councillor Reddish, do you wish to come back, and then Councillor Proctor?
No, I was just saying that I thought you would say that, but I felt it was worth asking. Thank you.
Councillor Proctor.
Yes, Chair, I understand the questions and concerns raised by colleague members of the committee. However, whatever hindsight might tell us, we are with this where we are, and I'm minded to say that this application should be recommended in accordance with, should be dealt with in accordance with the recommendation of the officers, and I think we're in very dangerous territory if we start to try and play around the edges. That's just a personal take on where we are.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Moffat, did you signal you wish to speak? No, thank you. Are there any further comments from members before I proceed to a vote? Councillor Northcott.
Thank you, Chairman, for your indulgence. Yes, there's no doubt that there's a demand for bungalows in Loggerheads. The area has seen a massive prescription of approved applications in its recent times. There's a big major development being built out as we speak. This will go some way to satisfy the local need for those who are able to step down from larger properties. I am, however, a little bit disappointed that we've missed the chance once again for those that are looking to get on that first rung of the ladder, and I can see that there is provision obviously for 11 bungalows that satisfy the affordable housing content, but I would have liked to have seen a little bit more in favour of this, as it would fit in with the neighbourhood development plan. Going back to the buffer, I feel that I can't support this application. I feel that this is something quite important to the area, and once it's gone, it's gone. And I'm fully mindful of the fact that the outline permission did give for this, so our hands are tied very much because of that. So for that reason alone, I can't support it, even though I see that the outline has obviously given that. I would have liked to have seen that the buffer zone extended a bit to at least 15 metres, at least, not the 30 metres that others are asking for, but I would have liked to see the 15 metres as a safe middle ground for that to take place. And I would have, you know, liked to see the dialogue, which is too late now, with the developers in terms of discussing this before it went to this stage. But it is what it is. It's you know, the ship has sailed on that one. So in light of the buffer zone, I won't be able to support this, but I fully understand the need for bungalows in this area, and that is much needed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I'm just check with our officer. I am correct, am I, in saying that the proposal for housing here is in conformity with the council's policies on social housing?
Yes, we secured, when granting outline planning permission, 25% provision of affordable units within this development, which is in accordance with our policy, or certainly in accordance with the policy at the time. Since the principle of development was approved, the neighbourhood plan has been made, and I can't say off the top of my head whether the neighbourhood plan seeks to secure more than 25% provision, but that was what the policy at the time of the principle was accepted required, and that's what has been secured with this development. The 11 units, affordable units proposed, is 25% provision of affordable units. So we secured full compliance with policy.
Okay, then let me just, if I may, I mean, I'm looking at my agenda and it says residential development up to 55 homes. 11, if 11 is 25%, doesn't that make 44?
That's whilst outline planning permission was granted for up to 55 dwellings, what is proposed in this scheme is a development of 44 dwellings. So you can only secure 25% provision of what's actually proposed and will be secured. So yeah, 11 is 25% of 44. I'm fairly sure my maths is correct.
No, they're absolutely spot on.
Yeah.
Are there any further comments from members before I proceed to vote? Looking at that, there are not. It's been proposed by Councillor Proctor that we accept this application. I am happy with some, well, happy is not quite the right word, with a little bit of a heavy heart. I feel that I will second this. Could I see those? I'll take the vote again in order. So could I see those in, well, I'll just simply ask each councillor whether they're for or against the application. So first of all, Councillor Burgess.
Well, under the circumstances, with a heavy heart, I'll have to approve it, although I am concerned about the buffer zone. I think the buffer should have been more, but under the circumstances, I will say, okay, yeah.
So 4, yes?
Yes.
Councillor Reddish.
4.
Councillor Moffat.
4.
Councillor Norfolk.
Against, and please, Chair, can I have my name recorded as such, please?
Certainly, and I'll make sure that that's done in the minutes. Councillor Maxfield.
Against.
Councillor Proctor.
4.
So I think I'm right in saying that that application is passed. Am I correct in saying that, Mr. Durham? Very well. So that application is passed. We've dealt with item 5 already. So I propose to progress to item 6, the application for minor development, land to the west of Newcastle Road, Blackbrook, etc. For this, again, I think I'm correct in saying we have ward councillors to speak. And again, Councillor Panter's name is on my list. I don't know whether he's now present.
Still absent, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Durham. In that case, I think we should invite first Councillor Hutton, and then after that, Mr. Mannering, I think, who is an objector to the application. Prior to doing any of that, I'll just ask our officers if they have anything further to say. Once again, I draw members' attention to the fact there is a supplementary report to this item.
Yes, there's nothing further to add to the main agenda report and what's set out in that supplementary report.
But nothing beyond that, Mr. Moulton?
No, nothing to add, no.
Chair?
In that case, Councillor Northcott.
Chair, I've just had a message from Councillor Panter who's trying to get into the system but can't. for some reason. So just be on the lookout for him, really.
Okay, so what I'll say is I think we can proceed with Councillor Hutton's representations to the committee, and if in the meantime we could behind the scenes be trying to connect Councillor Panther, who also has a right to speak as a ward member, I would be very grateful. But in the meantime, if we could bring in, please, Councillor Hutton to address us on this matter.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm honoured to be able to speak to
you again, Councillor. Just before you begin, you are cognizant with the rules about speaking. Yes, just I just say that as a formality.
I am. I would I'm not going to repeat the arguments, the technical arguments that the officers have set out, or that people like the local neighbourhood plan have set out. They're all very clear. But my biggest concern, and the concern that's been raised with me by my almost 2,500 residents, so many people have contacted me about this, is the fact that it sets a precedent, they believe, and that if this were allowed to go ahead, we would have building sites right across Newcastle rural, and there was nothing that the council could stop if this precedent was allowed. So that's the only point I particularly want to make, Chair, is that we're very worried, the residents are very worried that this would set a precedent if this was allowed, and then we'd see building sites everywhere. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I've just asked our clerk whether we now have Councillor Panther online at all.
Not yet, Chair, no.
Okay. I am correct in thinking, though, that Mr. Mannering is present in the waiting room. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Well, what I'll do is I'll briefly outline again the speaking protocol for his benefit. And again, if Councillor Panther is online after he's finished his representation, again, I will invite him to speak as a ward member. So again, just to reiterate the speaking protocol, speakers have 5 minutes to address the committee. After 4 of those minutes have elapsed, our clerk, Mr. Durham, will give a verbal warning to make sure that no crucial points are missed in those representations. And those 5 minutes are the total sum of the contribution of the speaker to the meeting this evening. So on those terms, I invite Mr. Mannering, who I hope is now in the room, to address the committee, beginning when he feels comfortable.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Chairman, councillors, council officers. My name is Andrew Mannering. I'm a resident of BLACKBROOK and I serve on Mayor and Aston Parish Council. Thank you for allowing me to bring to your attention the serious concerns of local residents. Permission is being sought to change the use of a parcel of agricultural land to a residential caravan site for 4 gypsy families. The site is located in open countryside to the south of Mare Hills in an area of landscape enhancement. The proposal would create a permanent residential development by virtue of its nature and design. The cumulative increase in scale, the external buildings, storage, parking and movement of vehicles would have a detrimental impact on the character and appearance of the landscape, contrary to policy N20 of the Newcastle and Lyme local plan, and would conflict with DC1 and DC2 of the adopted neighbourhood development plan, as it certainly would not enhance the character and appearance of the natural landscape. The field, which was previously used for hobby horticulture, was purchased at public auction by the applicants and was the subject of a similar refused planning application in 2019. In contravention of the refusal, your council was compromised and the site was unlawfully occupied and developed by the applicants in May of this year. Although the site has been unoccupied for many years, a dilapidated greenhouse and shed still remain on the field. It could not be considered as previously developed land, and any new development would impact on a very sensitive landscape and involve the loss of best and most versatile agricultural land. Situated in open countryside away from any settlement outside the village envelopes of Baldwin's Gate and Loggerheads, the development could not be supported by adequate infrastructure. Its location is unsuitable, away from services and facilities and without safe and convenient access to public transport. It could not be considered as a sustainable location for any development. The proposals would cause unacceptable visual harm to the landscape character as required in policy N17. It would destroy the elements that contribute to local distinctiveness and introduce incongruity by flanking the site with 2.2 metre high wooden fencing and creating a cluttered enclave. Staffordshire Highways have recommended refusal of the application and have suggested that the applicant has failed to demonstrate that the access to the site is safe and suitable and that the visibility displays are appropriate for the speed of passing traffic. The occupants of the caravans and their visitors would have to undertake all their journeys to and from the site by private vehicles. This represents unsustainable development that is contrary to the guidance of the National Planning Policy Framework. The 40 or so residents of Blackbrook would respectfully ask councillors to have regard for the potential effects of residents using the site for business purposes, the parking of commercial vehicles and the on-site storage of goods and materials. The River Tern runs along the southern boundary and North Staffordshire's principal aquifer is located below the site. This provides large volumes of clean drinking water to local residents. Policy S7 states that the council will resist development that would materially harm the equality or ecology of watercourses or damage groundwater resources. Severn Trent Water have advised that the applicant has failed to demonstrate what adverse impact the proposed development would have on critical groundwater sources at the nearby Wellings facility. They were concerned as to how surface influences should be monitored to avoid pollution of drinking water supplies. We would encourage councillors to have regard for the matters raised and turn down this application as it contravenes local and national planning legislation, and any form of development in this open countryside location is unsustainable, and the matters affecting potential pollution, danger to pedestrians, safe site access and excessive use of private vehicles are unresolvable. Please accept the recommendation of your officer and reject this application. Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mannering. Now then, I think Councillor Panther is with us, but he's trying to phone in to the meeting. I just ask if that's correct.
That's the impression I get, Chair. Yeah.
Could we then see if we can have his representation if he's able to speak to us via the telephone?
Sorry, Chair, Councillor Panther is not in the waiting room on the phone. He did connect temporarily, but has disconnected again.
Right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move to the debate. And again, if I could be alerted to whether the councillor, as a ward member, can connect, I believe he's having trouble with making connections. We will try and take his contribution, but I don't think we can wait for him to connect because he might not be able to connect. So in the meantime, first of all, I'd like to ask our officer if they wish to make any comments on what they've heard so far.
Yes, I think there's just one thing I would like to respond to. It's the concern raised by Councillor Hutton on behalf of residents that the granting of planning permission for this unauthorised development would set a precedent and would prevent the council as local planning authority from taking action against other unauthorised development in the open countryside. That's not the case. I mean, obviously, in this particular case, we are recommending refusal and that enforcement action is taken, but the granting of planning permission for this development would not prevent the council from taking action against other unauthorised development in the open countryside if it's deemed expedient to do so. That shouldn't be a factor that influences whether members of the plan committee vote with the recommendation to refuse or not. That's what I would wish to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Moulton. So I look for comments from members. Councillor Moffat.
I can't see that there's any reason why we'd go against the recommendations of the officers, or in fact the issues raised by local residents. But I would just kind of like to comment on the recognition of the unmet need for further gypsy and traveller pictures that we have as a borough. And I think that's something that we need to be looking to address as soon as possible in the appropriate fashion. That's all I wish to say.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Northcott, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to respond to Councillor Moffat's raising a point just a few seconds ago, this is something we are looking at as the point of the joint local plan at this time. In fact, this very week we're still making inroads into that. So it's something that hasn't been forgotten. It's something that is needed. But however, it brings us on to this point. One would expect if one was building a house in the countryside, certain rules and regulations you would have to go through before you did that. I'm really disappointed that there hasn't been any dialogue with the local community prior to this action being taken. I'm also disappointed that there's no submitted plans in terms of the foundations of the site, which normally building control have to sign off before any development is made and finalised. That hasn't been done. But the biggest issue for me is the safety of the inhabitants on the proposed site. The fact that you're going to have to, as it says in the report, to leave and enter the site via a motor vehicle, because it's not safe to do so otherwise. There's no pavements, it's not lit. Both the A53 and the A51 are very fast roads. There's no provision for that. So that being said, I would be mindful to support the officer's recommendations 100%, because it looks after the integrity and safety aspect of the children and the inhabitants that are expected to reside there. It's a dangerous place. It's not in a suitable location whatsoever. You could think of lots of other areas that would be more suitable, but this, I'm afraid, isn't. It's in one of the most obscure. It's not ideal. You know, there's issues of damp and flooding and coldness in the winter. The former greenhouses were always frozen up in the winter. It's subject to severe frosts, and I pity anybody who has to sort of live in that down in that dip. This isn't acceptable in the countryside. It's inappropriate. It's not sustainable. For the reasons we're expected the children to attend schools, doctors, appointments for all the things necessary in childhood and growing up. This can't be supplied easily to this site, and the over-reliance, in fact the total 100% reliance on transport to achieve those aims isn't acceptable. So from a safety aspect point of view, I'm 100% behind the officer's recommendations as written in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Could I ask Councillor Proctor first, then Councillor Moffat, I think we should speak again.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I fully understand comments of all the members, Councillor Moffat's comments about the necessity for encampments and all of the other comments that have been passed by the speakers, and indeed by the comments contained in the report with the recommendation for refusal. And for all those reasons, and I'm not going to take everyone's time up by going through them again, but it's obviously very clear that this application should, in line with officer recommendation, be refused for all of the reasons that have been outlined.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Moffat.
Yeah, just to reiterate that I did say that there's absolutely no reason to go against the recommendations of the officers and indeed the objections raised by residents. And I'd just like to thank Councillor Northcott for reassuring us that actually the looking for alternative provision is underway, and that's really, and I completely agree with all of his comments about the well-being, safety, etc. that site would not provide. Okay.
Thanks very much, Councillor. Councillor Burgess, did you wish to speak, or have I misread your gesture there?
Well, I was just agreeing with what Councillor Northcote and what Councillor Moffat was saying. I don't know the site at all, but reading what I've read, I will be supporting the recommendation for refusal on the grounds stated. So I will be supporting Councillor Northcote and other councillors if they wish to refuse this application.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And finally, I think Mr. Fleet perhaps wished to respond to something he'd heard in the debate. Again, I'm not sure if I've read the gesture correctly.
It was just to confirm what Councillor Northcott had said earlier about the development plan. It's certainly part of the work we're doing with consultants ARC4 to look at the needs of the travelling community for travellers, gypsies, show people as well. But that will get picked up within the development plan side. So it's just reiterating the earlier point. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Before we go to a vote, I'd just like to seek confirmation that we don't have Councillor Panther with us. Am I?
No, he's still going to voicemail.
Okay. I think really we must proceed to a vote. And before we do, I've heard a lot of speakers this evening voice their support of the recommendations. I'll just add to that if councillors feel that there are further reasons for refusal, now would be the time to add those reasons and not wait for any future meeting. So a moment's thought, you may well feel that what your officers placed in front of you is absolutely correct and spot on, but if there is anything to be added to that, now would be the time to do it. Mrs. Moulton, do you wish to speak at that point?
Yes, to reiterate what you say, if there is any further reasons to be added, that they need to be expressed now. But I'd also want to remind members that this is the recommendations in two parts. There's a part dealing with the determination of the planning application, and if the decision is to refuse, then consequent, well, there's a further recommendation with regard to the taking of enforcement action, so that needs to be part of the decision making process as well.
Yep.
Right, I think I'm going to take both recommendations together as a vote. If we get anyone who votes against, I will then take them separately to determine that. But for reasons of economy of time, I'm going to ask members whether they're in favour of both the recommendations as printed. And again, I will do that councillor by councillor. So, Councillor Burgess.
Yes, as recommendation on both counts. The against.
Well, for the recommendation, I think you mean, councillor, yes, or are you against the recommendation, which is one of refusal?
I'm for the recommendations by the officers on both counts. Sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Reddish.
For on both accounts.
Yeah.
Councillor Moffat.
For.
Councillor Northcott.
For on both accounts.
Yeah.
Councillor Maxfield.
For on both accounts.
Councillor Proctor.
For on both.
That therefore is passed unanimously, and we can progress to our next item, item 7. Item 7 is an application for minor development, land north of Pepper Street, Keele. And I look to our officer. Again, there's one small, I think, supplementary item which has been included in your pack on this. I look to our officer for further comments, if any.
There isn't a supplementary report on this one, and no, there's nothing further to add. It is an application to modify the Section 106 agreement. It's to extend the time within which the developer must substantially commence. A further 12 months is being sought, and the recommendation is to accept, to agree to that amendment. Modification.
Thank you, Mr. Walton. No, I realise it's not a supplementary thing, but I did note on the agenda that there is an extra document attached to the item. That's all.
Oh, right. Okay, sorry.
To draw members' attention to that fact.
Yep.
Any comments from members?
Yes, Chair.
Councillor Max.
I
Sorry.
would just, it's all right, anyway. I would just agree with what the officers have said. Is, you know, I think we're actually, the times that we are in at the moment, I think it is only fair to actually give people this an extra 12 months in order to actually sort out this agreement. COVID has actually had an impact on all areas of society, from infrastructure to personal and everything else. So I think I'm very much inclined to agree with the recommendation.
I tend to agree with you, Councillor. I think were we to refuse, we find ourselves in a rather invidious place in terms of, as you rightly say, what's happened with the pandemic and such like. Councillor Moffat, did you wish to speak on this?
Oh, dear, the battery's gone down.
Councillor Moffat, as I said, do you wish to speak on this?
Yeah, sorry, just to that's not me, by the way.
Could I ask whoever that is to mute themselves, because we're getting an awful lot of background noise at the moment, or maybe if I can ask whoever's residing in the background to mute people and just leave Councillor Moffat.
Okay. All I wanted to do was to second Councillor Maxfield's proposal, recommendations.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Are there any further members who wish to speak on this item? In that case, I'm going to proceed to a vote. Councillor Reddish.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Moffat.
For.
Councillor Northcott.
For, Chair.
Councillor Maxfield.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Proctor.
For.
And Councillor Burgess, if she's still with us, because
Yes, I am. Yes, I'm for. I'm trying to get the battery has just gone down on my iPad, and I'm trying to get it charged up.
Okay.
So
Well, we'll stay with just audio then, because that's going to save you battery power in the.
Well, I'm going to connect it up if I can just find the right connection. So do bear with me.
I think we can say that that item passes unanimously, and we can progress to item 8, the application for minor development, High Street, KNUTTON. And again, there is a supplementary here, and there is a further item I note in the packet as well. Beyond that supplementary, again, I'll just ask our officer if there is anything further to report on this matter.
Nothing further to report, thank you.
Thank you very much. I therefore look for comments from members.
Move the recommendation.
Councillor Northcott. Councillor Burgess, could I ask you if you would mute your device at the moment, because there's an awful lot of background noise going on, and it will be useful for other members.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, these sort of buildings, installations are needed for this modern world that we're all living in, we all buy into, we all use every day. In fact, we're using right now. So these are sort of things that we have to support. So I would happily second the recommendation of the previous councillor. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Any further comment from members? Councillor Moffat? No. In that case, I propose to move to a vote. So see the recommendation and indeed supplementary in front of you. Could I please see those in favour of the recommendation? Councillor Reddish.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Moffat.
In favour, yes. For.
Councillor Northcott.
For.
Councillor Maxfield.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Proctor.
For.
And Councillor Burgess, if you can hear me. The answer may be no to that question, but nonetheless.
No, it's 4.
There you are. So we in that case pass this NEM-CON rather than by an overwhelming majority. And that allows us to progress to information items. So first of all, item 9 on open enforcement cases. Again, I don't know if one of our officers wishes to speak to this item.
I have sought to establish whether there is any explanation as to why the number of open cases is increasing, and there's no apparent reason. I suspect it may be as a result of the lockdown, the measures in place, which means people spend more time at home and are maybe spotting unauthorised developments and bringing it to our attention, or possibly even carrying out development without being aware of the need for planning permission, resulting in complaints being made. But yeah, we are mindful that that it does appear that there may be a trend forming in terms of an increase in open cases, and we will be doing what we can to arrest such a trend and hopefully seek to reduce. We will reduce the number of cases, and the numbers will start to go down.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Moulton. I look for comment from members on this item.
No, I think, Chair, that what Mrs. Moulton said is a very obvious and likely reason for where we are, and they don't cause me any great concern.
Okay, I think, you know, we ought to keep an eye on this. Obviously, enforcement is something that the public are rightly very interested in, and we don't want to be seen to be getting behind the curve. So perhaps what we should do is see the special circumstances that we're in at the moment, perhaps producing this, but also have an eye to make sure that we don't see a trend when the next set of figures come out. So what I would suggest, I think, is that obviously there's no point in querying the figures. I'm absolutely sure they're correct, but just being mindful of the direction of travel the next time we see such a report. Yep. Our members, and I'm going to take this by acclamation, I think our members happy that the report is accepted. Oh, Councillor Northcott, I think, wishes to speak before we go there.
Thanks, Chair. I think I'd like to extend my my gratitude and thanks to all the planning staff that have been able to keep open throughout the COVID-19 lockdown and the situation that we find ourselves in today, and have been able to tackle some of the enforcement issues that have been still on the books despite COVID, despite what's faced them. And I just wish to you know, hats off and thank them really for the work that they've done at all levels, at all grades. This is very important, you know, as well as the targets that we must achieve. This is one of them that we need to achieve. And I've got no doubt whatsoever that under the leadership of the present head of planning and development manager, that we'll get through and we'll see these figures further reduce in future, because we've been left as an authority quite a few legacy issues in terms of enforcement that the planning team are working through as they when they can, as COVID improves and they can do site visits in a more secure way. So I'm really pleased at the way in the direction that things are going in.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Reddish, I think, wished to speak.
No, I thought you were going to a vote of affirmation. That's why I put my hand up.
Okay. I said acclamation, Councillor. In other words, I was going to take sort of generally nods, approving faces, etc., to be in favour of the acceptance of this thing. I think we can do that with information items in a way that I'm more unhappy about when it comes to actual items of decision. So are we? And again, I look for dissent at this point. Are we happy to accept this data?
Happy, Chair.
Yep.
In that case, let's progress to the more detailed report on specific cases. And here, what I've proposed to do is take these item by item. Some of these have already been dealt with previous meetings, so and we'll come back to further meetings. So we can probably progress through this fairly quickly. But I'm just going through them as they stand. we've got the residential development on the former colliery site at Silverdale. Are there any comments members wish to make on that item? So in that case, if we progress to number 5, Boggs Cottages, which of course will be coming back to us at our next meeting.
I think we just received that report at the next meeting as per our agreement.
And I think members will probably be in agreement that the next item on this report, the land at Doddlespool, will fall into the same category.
Yeah.
That brings us to the barn, Moss House, Bignell End. And again, I look for comments on the report here, if anyone wishes to make it. This is our last item on this particular agenda point.
Receive the report, Chair.
Yeah, receive it.
Okay, so if members are content, we'll receive that information. And that brings us to item 11 on our report, changes to the planning system. And I think probably Mr. Fleet is going to speak to this item.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, apologies for the lateness of the paper. It was one of those that I started writing, and you start to realise how much the government has sort of issued in the last few weeks and since July. There's been probably one of the greatest amounts of sort of change to the planning system in a flurry that I've seen for many a year. So we've had a series of changes to permitted development rights and the Business and Planning Act, Use Classes Order. All of those have already come out. But on top of that, when you're just sort of thinking, right, this is going well, we had the white paper Planning for Growth coming, or Planning for the Future coming through as well. And that document has had, or possibly will have, large impact on the way we deliver the planning service and how it affects our communities, the people who live here and work here. But in short, I'll sort of pick up on those first 3 items about the permitted development. And this is a piece of legislation that looks to allow developers to add extra floors to properties, 2 floors for blocks of flats. Now, potentially that has quite significant impacts on schemes where we were concerned maybe about sort of scale and mass, impact on neighbours, shadowing, those sort of elements. But the changes aren't a carte blanche allowance for people to go ahead and undertake development. There are a series of checks and measures that are in the system. So it is a sort of a new process rather than just a sort of a free allowance in that on the extra floors element of the permitted development changes. The other act, though, which caught a lot of headline attention, the Business and Planning Act. Now, this has an element about the street licensing, which I know Nesta Barker has already done some work on for that side of it. But in planning, it does generate a couple of sort of unusual aspects. One is the allowance to extend planning permissions to sort of allow them to carry on forth because of the COVID delays. It echoes something we saw a few years ago when we had the financial crash. So it's not brand new in that sense, but it does actually allow some expired applications to be resurrected effectively. So that's an unusual element. And when that comes forward, or should it ever come forward, we'll deal with that and update members appropriately, but it's an allowance in there. Working hours, this is one that some of you as local ward members may have already come across or will come across. But during those sort of months of April, May, June, when COVID really sort of had us under lockdown, effectively the development industry came to a grinding halt. The government is very much focused on this sort of agenda of trying to keep the regeneration, keep business going. And part of that is to introduce flexibilities around working hours. So there are criteria on when the permission was allowed, what can be done. But essentially it allows work, I think it's up to about sort of 8 o'clock at night and on Saturdays as well, right through into the evening. So these are late hours that go into them. And I know at Loggerheads, there was a lot of concern earlier with a previous scheme about trying to curtail some of those hours. This new amendment that the government has endorsed sort of takes that away from us a bit. It's a temporary measure, fortunately, but you may find that in future recommendations to committee, if we're proposing works, it'll be taking into account this new allowance about working hours. So we will find sometimes our ability to curtail working is hamstrung by the legislation. There's some technical changes there about the appeals process, that they can separate appeals into written representations, hearings as well, and there's some work in there about the London plan, which I only mention because it allows for the London plan to be consulted on digitally rather than in paper form. And that's something we'll be looking through our own statement of community involvement for our own joint local plan, that ability, should it be necessary, to do digital only consultation. So we'd still prefer, if we can, to have a face-to-face element and be out in the libraries and the village halls. But if circumstances drive us down that path, then digital might be the route we have to go to keep momentum on the plan delivery. So that's the sort of Business and Planning Act. Use classes order. This is another one which, for those of us who've been in the planning system for many a year and dealt with things like A1 retail and A2 financial services and all of these language we have about hot food takeaways, some of those classes have been quite dramatically shaken up, and the A class, that traditional high street area, has now been scrapped. It's been replaced with a new class E. So you'll find that some of those uses are now sort of bundled into an E class, and it sort of makes changes within the whole gamut of uses there a lot more flexible for business owners. It does mean that potentially we will see some changes occurring out of centre, with commercial users exploiting the use classes order to allow what we would have traditionally seen as town centre uses being delivered out of centre. Long term, what will that mean for the high street? We wait to find out. But on the other side of it, it does open up opportunities for landowners, property owners, to try and optimise their property. And with the news you might have seen in the press today, for example, like Marks and Spencer's, who are making large-scale redundancies, the high street needs to have some sort of opportunity around it. And the sort of model there is trying to sort of give some dynamism to the changes. One of the pluses out of this is that the sui generis uses of its own category is swallowing up some of those uses like pubs and hot food takeaways, which might make it harder for developers to try and swap their uses around, so making them very much more bespoke permissions. Those are some of the changes that are rolled in, but the sort of headline stuff around the white paper as well. It's been out for just over a week now, and we're starting to see some of the sort of commentators getting to grips with that. What I haven't seen at the moment is any sort of immediate backlash in the national press or anywhere where anybody says this is a disaster. It's when there was a change about 10 years ago and we were looking at some of the stuff around changes to the green belt and other bits, then there was a bit more of an immediate reaction. The reaction now seems more nuanced, and we've got a consultation period on the white paper that takes us through to the end of October. But the government's asking a series of questions on that, which we'll respond to in due course. But there does seem to be some points of discussion, and there are some that I will openly say I endorse. There are some that I sort of raise an eyebrow to, and I sort of think, will this work? But unless those questions are asked, unless we try to explore new ways of doing things, we just get stuck in the same old, and it creates more problems for us. The headline in the white paper is zoning. That's the one key thing. There are 3 areas that the borough will be covered by if it goes ahead. Those are areas of protection, which includes conservation areas, green belt and the like, those sort of assets. There's growth areas. These are sort of parcels of land where the government are sort of looking to promote development, and there's a key element with those I'll come back to in a second. But I sense for the majority of the area in the borough, it'll be under the renewal zone. And those are the sort of areas where there'll be a pro-development stance, similar to what we already have, where there's a presumption in favour of development. But it'll be sort of identifying key uses that are acceptable in those zones, and it will push forward to try and facilitate development more readily. The growth zones do have an unusual catch in them, that when the plan is adopted, it'll be treated, the suggestion goes, that any allocations within the plan will automatically get the equivalent of outline planning consent. So it will become imperative that in that plan preparation process, high level of consideration is given to those sites, because there won't be a second bite at the cherry. Once that plan is adopted, that principle of development is established on those sites, and we're left with what is tantamount to reserve matters to be considered. So that is something we'll need to focus back on. The whole ethos of the plan, though, is very much about stripping back the plan process. This is something I welcome. It's taking back some of the weight, and you might have seen things like the duty to cooperate, sustainability appraisals. They're being taken out. There are other bits to come in and counter it. They're not scrapping environmental judgment on the plan, but it's taking a more sort of pragmatic approach to the whole process, hopefully. And that's where I think there's opportunity. Section 106s, community infrastructure levy, they're out in the new plans, but they'll be replaced by a flat levy, an infrastructure levy. Now, current thinking goes that that will be sort of back-ended on the development process, and the language is more open and clear that this is more around being a possible tax on development rather than a sort of infrastructure element that the current sort of 106. One of the challenges with the current framework is a lot of 106s are tied to a very specific site, and that if you want to change it, it's quite cumbersome. The government are looking at flexibilities about where that spend is, who makes those decisions on spend, and how that will link in, particularly with the parishes and the neighbourhood plans as well. There'll be an integration with those, as I understand. There's also a recognition of trying to strip away the duplication of policies, with local plans repeating essentially design standards which are set nationally. So they'll try and go more for the plan being about sites rather than policies in some of that respect. But there will be design standards for local areas, so we'll respect some of the sort of character issues around the plan, around the borough. How that works as well, and what grain of detail we go into, is one to be discussed. One design standard for the whole borough could look very homogenous and a bit bland, but having design standards for every street, for example, could be never-ending job to keep on top of that. But again, it's worth looking at. There's other elements within there. There's the use of more permitted development, which I've already touched on, and digital planning, more emphasis on that. But this authority's already made good headway with that, so I don't think we've got too far to travel on that road. But certainly, if adopted, we could see this sort of process. Now, the government have said they'd like to see some of those early plans coming through before the end of this Parliament. Now that ends in sort of May 2024. So we're looking really then at some of these plans. To have the plans go through their 30-month review cycle could mean that this legislation, primary and secondary, is all done and dusted by sort of the end of next year. So I don't think the government are looking to sort of drag their feet with this process. And it will be a process of waiting for the consultation responses, see where we get to in the new year, and see how far we go with this. But certainly I think the white paper is on the cusp of proposing some of the biggest changes since 1947. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fleet. As you say, big changes to a system which has been around for a long time. So I think we all need to be aware of these things. Little things like the change of use categories, which are sort of bread and butter for local members, I think, to think about. But equally some of the larger ideas that have been outlined there. So we need to be very much on the ball here. And I thank our officer for giving us the digest of the material. I'm sure that Mr. Fleet will answer detailed questions if they're emailed to him individually, but if there are any questions that members wish to address to him now, that now will be a good time to do that. So I don't know if members have any comments to make. Councillor Northcott, I think. Reddish. Virtually at the same time.
I'll let Councillor Reddish, ladies before gentlemen.
That's very decent.
On the screen. Yeah, I was just going to say this might be a good topic to have further discussion on as a planning training session, not just for the planning committee, but for all the councillors, so that we're all slightly more aware and have a little bit more time to discuss it. So I think I'd like to say, can we have a planning training session on it?
I think that's something that we can look into, and I with the portfolio member here in particular, I think we can look into. One question there, of course, if this were open to all members of the council, I think it would be quite appropriate for it to be open for all members of the council. We would have to consider whether this would be a face-to-face meeting, and I personally very much hope we can get back to face-to-face meetings by the end of this calendar year, or whether we will be featuring this as a virtual meeting. But I'm sure that Councillor Northcott and indeed Mr. Fleet can take those comments on board. It seems to be quite sensible in some ways, and think about that, how to progress that in the future.
Thank you.
Councillor Northcott.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Reddish, for your comments. That's something that is very appropriate. I think that's something that's very worthwhile in pursuing. I think we just need to see if there's been any challenges to the white paper, because there's some pretty wide ramifications, including having planning committee meetings, of course. And we've all seen the paper that supported the developments, particularly in the south of the country, where the development for offices into housing for the homeless was in the south has been particularly shambolic. We just need to see the fallout and the challenges from the people that have interest in this white paper to see the full ramifications, I think, before we leap too highly and embed this into members' heads. I think we need to just have a step back, look at it, look at the effects, look at the challenges that are put forward, the arguments, the counter arguments, whether this would be good for us as a council going forward in terms of the joint local plan. And just to say that this here could be, if it's whitewashed, it could be no more than a developer's charter to develop roughshod over large parts of the country. So I just want to make sure that we are satisfied that the checks will be put in place, that the white paper suggests particularly the rural areas, which I'm particularly fond of course, as you know, Chair, that once we have something of meaning, full value, that in terms of interpretations, that we can then cascade that down to members in a form of a proper training session. I think that will be very useful for members to get up to speed with this.
Any further comment from members? I think so. We can say that that suggestion has been taken on board, but I think, as Councillor Northcott says, we need to know what is at the moment a question of consultation in some ways, the direction of travel before we stick our foot in the water. Yep. Any further comment from members?
No.
Well, then, again, I'd like to thank Mr. Fleet for providing that digest for us. There's lots for everyone, I think, to think about there, not just those members of this committee, but for all councillors and indeed members of the public in general. So I would urge everyone to think long and hard and get hold of this documentation. That can bring us to item 12 on our agenda. And can I just ask our officers if this item is in fact necessary? So I was not notified of any urgent business, and in that respect, do we need to resolve that the public be excluded?
Sorry, Chair, no, we don't need to do. It was just left on the bottom of the agenda.
Okay, so it's simply a trelitition item. Fair enough. These things happen. In that case, I will move to our final item, item 13, which is urgent business as considered or as defined by the relevant section of the relevant Act.